Well, it's 3 o'clock Thursday somewhere. So welcome to Small Business Update, the show that CNN has referred to as a hot mess inside a dumpster fire, inside a train wreck. I'm John Fruitkin. I'm here with my partner Adam Bach. Well, this has been a fun week.
So fun.
So, we have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about the debate because we can't help ourselves. We are going to talk a little bit about where we stand with a stimulus package. We're going to talk about any government shutdown that might be coming, some closings, some stuff like that, executive orders and legality, and a bunch of stuff. But we start where we always start, which is sports. NFL, they had a perfect protocol for positive test results, and they couldn't withstand the first challenge. So Tennessee Titans and Pittsburgh Steelers game is postponed, and it was going to be played on Monday or Tuesday, and now the NFL says we'll play it later. I guess they're going to swap some bye weeks to make this happen, but this is not going to be the first and only time this happens, presumably.
Yeah, I would imagine that this is going to be an issue going through the season. They don't have a bubble like the NBA, right?
No, they don't have a bubble. They have testing throughout the week. And, of course, in this particular case, there's a bit of an outbreak on the Tennessee Titans. I guess part of the problem that we discussed earlier is that you don't know how many false negatives you have, and so those will start picking up over time. And obviously, there's a number of cases. They have at least 10 at this point. So anyway, good luck to the Tennessee Titans getting healthy, but makes us all wonder how we're going to do NFL-wise this year. But yeah, it turns out the bubble thing did work.
Yeah.
The NBA is kind of kicking along. LeBron James in his 9th finals in 10 years. The only year he didn't make the finals, he was injured. That's pretty crazy. I mean, in fairness, he's manipulated teams to have like one of the other best players,
Right.
on his team every year.
It's very persuasive.
Yeah, but not a bad accomplishment. So hats off to him. We had 2 absolute catastrophes on television this week. We had the first presidential debate, and then we had the Indians losing 10-9 last night against the Yankees.
Oh.
I will frame this up for everybody because the game itself probably won't, be very important in 3 days when people start watching this. But what is important to know is Major League Baseball had it spot on. Rain was coming, 7:05. They did not start the game. They waited till 7:50, and the rain started at 7:55. Playing basically a half an inning before they had to stop the game again for 90 minutes. It's just pretty 2020, if you ask me. It's like you just couldn't do anything right. And what's interesting is this was decided by the league office, not the umpires, because it was prior to the game starting. League office, should call a local weatherman. I was looking, you could do a little slider thing. I don't know if you've ever seen this on like Weather Channel, and you could see where the rain was coming. I was like, this doesn't seem right, but what am I? Am I a weatherman just because I have a green screen and all the time I'm in front of it and not here at Radix? But anyway, no, they didn't call local weatherman. Local weather said probably about 7:50 it'll start raining. It was about 7:55 or 8. All right, Indians lose in the playoffs, but what this most significantly means is this is the last game for the Cleveland Indians. They'll be changing their name next year. Twitter is trending with Cleveland losers, which just hurts my feelings. For those of you who haven't picked up on this, I grew up in Cleveland, and I, in fact, work in public relations for the Cleveland Indians in the 90s. So let's talk about law, because my amusement is done for the day. So we had the debate. There was some mention about executive orders, and well, Adam, I guess you're the boss of executive orders. So let's talk some law for a minute.
All right. Let's, in the middle of all of this craziness, we did have a presidential executive order and I think it was kind of underreported. I don't know. I didn't hear much about it, so I thought I would cover some of it.
Well, what's interesting is that we have these like congressional, resolutions that are just like how you feel. And weirdly, we've kind of turned these executive orders, which actually have historically meant something, into kind of resolutions, like this is how I feel. This might be the number one example of that. But
Yes.
let's talk about, it was underreported. Nobody really talked about it.
So the presidential executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping. This was issued on September 22nd, 2020 by President Trump, and it really targets workplace training. It seems kind of an odd thing to be writing an executive order about, but he felt strongly about it, and and let me just go through some of the issues. The purpose of this is stated to promote economy and efficiency in federal contracting, to promote unity in the federal workforce, and to combat offensive and anti-American race and sex stereotyping and scapegoating. So this is a quote from the executive order. From the battlefield of Gettysburg to the bus boycott in Montgomery and the Selma to Montgomery marches, heroic Americans have valiantly risked their lives to ensure that their children would grow up in a nation living out its creed expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So that's the big picture, big idea, supposedly behind this order. And it also says, today, however, many people are pushing a different view that America is an irredeemably racist and sexist country. That some people, simply on account of their race or sex, are oppressors, and that racial and sexual identities are more important than our common status as human beings and Americans. So that's the background of this executive order. And then it says, these views are designed to divide us and to prevent us from uniting as one people in pursuit of one common destiny for our great country. So they identified some issues in the federal government. It says, instructors and materials teaching that men and members of certain races, as well as our most venerable institutions, are inherently sexist and racist, are appearing in workplace diversity trainings across the country, even in components of the federal government and among federal contractors. So that's the issue that he identified as feeling like needs to be solved. All right, so they gave some examples, and these actually come from the executive order. So apparently in the Department of Treasury training, there was stated that virtually all white people, regardless of how woke they are, contribute to racism. And the training encouraged employees to avoid narratives that Americans should be more colorblind, or let people's skills and personalities be what differentiates them. They gave another example of Argonne National Laboratory. That's a federal entity. And their training said racism is interwoven into every fabric of America. Also has statements like colorblindness and the meritocracy as actions of bias. Meritocracy, what is it? A system, organization, or society in which people are chosen and moved into positions of success, power, and influence on the basis of their demonstrated abilities and merit. They're saying that's a bad thing. Sandia National Laboratories, a federal entity, had an emphasis on rationality over emotionality, was a characteristic of white males. And then they asked the white males present in the training to acknowledge their privilege to each other.
Well, that makes me sad. It might be too emotional.
It might be too emotional.
Yeah.
And the last one is the Smithsonian Institution. It stated concepts like objective, rational, linear thinking, hard work, and being the key to success, the nuclear family, and a belief in a single God are not values that unite Americans of all races, but are instead aspects and assumptions of whiteness. And then facing your whiteness is hard and can result in feelings of guilt, sadness, confusion, defensiveness, or fear. So these are the kinds of trainings that are going on that the president thought this is not helpful to our country. And he said that this type of training perpetuates racial stereotypes and divisions and can use subtle coercive pressure to ensure conformity of viewpoint. So that's why he issued this executive order. So he said, therefore, it shall be the policy of the United States not to promote race or sex stereotyping or scapegoating in the federal workforce or in the uniformed services, and not to allow grant funds to be used for these purposes. In addition, federal contractors will not be permitted to inculcate such views in their employees. So obviously, this applies to the federal government, to the military, and those who receive federal money and those who do work for the federal government. So these are the types of people that have to comply with this executive order. So if you're doing contracting with the federal government, the contractor agrees not to use any workplace training that inculcates in its employees any form of race or sex stereotyping or any form of race or sex scapegoating. So I thought I'd define a couple of these terms. Stereotype is a fixed, overgeneralized belief about a particular group or class of people. So not supposed to.
That's so classic Adam Buck. I guess that's a very particular group of people.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. So, and then scapegoating, which is kind of an unusual term, the act of blaming a person or group for something bad that has happened or that someone else has done. So these are the general things that you can't do in your trainings if you're in the federal government or if you receive federal funds or if you have contracts with the federal government. So if you do, you're supposed to review all your training materials and to see if they will be compliant or if now they are in violation of this executive order. And if you violate this executive order, your contract can be canceled, terminated, suspended in whole or in part, and you may be declared ineligible for further government contracts. So depending on your business, that could be a big deal or it could not be a big deal. But other sanctions that are available, the government may publish the names of contractors that have failed to comply. They can get an injunction to enforce compliance, or they can refer you to the EEOC or DOJ for further proceedings, whatever that means.
Talking to.
Yes. So you must provide copies of your training or workshop materials having to do with diversity and inclusion, as well as information about the duration, frequency, and expense of such activities. So now they want to see what you're training in your business. So obviously there's opposition to this. There are people that don't like this executive order. And some of the things I found, the executive order will deal a crippling setback to corporate efforts to increase workplace equality and address race and gender disparities. Some businesses are unclear really what's allowed and what is not, and obviously don't want to violate it. And then it says it's an obvious play at white supremacy was another opposing viewpoint that I found. But I think that's really the big issue is how do you know you're going to violate this? And because it's a big deal for some businesses to violate it. So the concern is you just won't do any training at all because that's the safest thing to do. And then they thought, well, maybe that's not the best policy either. So anyway, they're kind of stuck. So not surprisingly, there will be a looming legal battle over this. And there are individuals and companies and industry groups who are supporting efforts to mount a legal challenge to the executive order. So this is brand new. You know, this was just September 22nd. We've got the debates going on. We have the presidential election. This probably isn't top of mind for most people, but I would imagine down the road, there will be some challenges to this. But I thought it was fascinating that we do have the executive order and a lot of people don't know about it. And if you do business with the federal government, it is important to know that it exists and how you're going to comply.
Probably unconstitutional, says one legal scholar. I'm kidding, I say that. So yeah, turns out federal government has a hard time dictating what individuals and businesses can say. And so that will be one of the areas of legal challenge. But it does send a message to some of the president's core supporters that he's kind of with them. So Adam, stand back and stand by.
Will do.
Real quick, we did have an extension of kind of the operation of the government through December 11th. So we will not have a government shutdown pre-election, which was a possible prediction of mine. Another thing that we have is still the concept that maybe we will have a stimulus package. The kind of final theoretical opportunity for that would be this week. I suspect Steve Mnuchin said that the president gave him full authority to increase the amount of money that is in the stimulus. Republicans do not like that. Democrats are trying to hold firm because they think politically not having a stimulus is a good thing. I don't know. I just wouldn't expect it this month. It's really hard to imagine in the final stretch of presidential election. It is October that we will have a stimulus package, but we'll keep you in the loop with exactly what's happening. I want to talk kind of broadly about the economy. There are a lot of signals that the economy is starting to get worse. 837,000 Americans filed new unemployment claims last week. And so this in combination with the 650,000 self-employed who are allowed to get money under the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program means there's 1.4 million total first time claims for benefits. And this shows the kind of a slowing pace of jobs coming back. And it looks like the number will be roughly around 8.2%, which is obviously significantly higher than it was. Combined with that, we're starting to see stores closing. Not surprisingly, men's fashion and women's fashion have been hit. To the extent you consider it fashion, H&M is closing 250 stores. Zara is closing 1,200 stores. American Eagle Outfitter, GameStop is also closing stores. GameStop is interesting to me, but I kind of get it. You guys, is there gaming going on in the Buck household?
No, not gaming. But it's fascinating that clothes. I mean, are people not buying clothes anymore? Are they just switching to online? Obviously, people are still buying, but I'm just kind of curious. Do you have any idea why? I understand maybe formal clothes, because there's fewer meetings, there's fewer conferences, so I understand it may be more casual in nature, the clothes you're buying, but I imagine people are still buying clothing.
Well, people are buying clothes, but they're tending to buy the cheap stuff at Target because they're just at home. I, for example, don't even wear pants anymore. So that
they're optional.
Yeah, pants way down in sales. But people are going out less, right? And they're finding less occasion that they have to wear fancy clothes. I forgot to wear a tie to virtual court the other day, which my father, grandfather, uncle would just be appalled by the way. I mean, they'd be appalled I was going to court on the computer, but they would be really appalled. And then, of course, you don't stand for the judge.
Right. Yeah. Well, I went to court on the computer virtually, and opposing counsel, one of the other attorneys, was in a T-shirt at his house.
Oh, that's kind of nice.
That's really taking it to the next level in casual court appearances.
So all this means, though, that we are likely to start seeing at some point bankruptcies. We've seen a drop in bankruptcies, interestingly, this year, probably related to different programs and lack of ability for evictions and foreclosures to occur. And we'll talk about that in 1 second, because I do want to highlight it. But the suspicion, strong suspicion by at least me, is that we are going to see a lot more bankruptcies in 2021, heading through the year into 2022. And the question is, why? And so from a business perspective or an individual, the reason that you end up filing bankruptcy is basically to buy time against something bad happening. In this particular instance, we're not seeing lawsuits filed by banks to, take the business over. We're not seeing landlords kicking people out, but that obviously will at some point happen. And when that happens, bankruptcy has the advantage of something called the automatic stay. Basically means that if you're if you are working with somebody who files for bankruptcy, you are not permitted to take any action whatsoever to collect on any judgments or to pursue any judgments outside of the bankruptcy court without the bankruptcy court's permission. And so this is something important to kind of keep in mind as companies and individuals are filing bankruptcy. And it's also probably time to think a little bit about your credit standards, about whether or not you want to keep extending credit into what level. But we'll talk more over the next few weeks about bankruptcies and how they work. But today I want to talk a little bit about the CDC order about evictions, okay? So Adam is an Arizona certified real estate specialist. I'm good at Google, so I'm going to take this today. CDC, which is obviously part of the federal government, has a moratorium on residential evictions through the end of December. Arizona has a moratorium on evictions through the end of October. So I'm not focused on Arizona. I'm going to talk about the CDC because there's something very important about that was, I guess, maybe one of those things that could happen in this sort of circumstance, which is it's a little bit of an empty promise because it requires people to do something. So I'm going to explain what that something is. So first of all, there is confusion. There's no question there's confusion about what all the details are about the CDC order. And by the way, whether or not it is enforceable. But question is, first of all, are you protected? Few things. You need to be a renter in apartment, house, mobile home. And you cannot pay your rent due to coronavirus-related job loss or income reduction. You need to have qualified for a stimulus payment under the CARES Act. This means less than $99,000 in 2020 of income or $198,000 year of income if you're a joint filer. And that you've tried to get government assistance to cover rent. And you're able to demonstrate your inability to pay because of financial hardship due to COVID, okay? You also have to demonstrate that you have made your best efforts to timely make partial payments, and you would become homeless if you were evicted. So thinking that through, that applies to approximately nobody, right? Because homeless means that you can't live with Adam. Everyone knows he'll take everyone. So here's the part where it gets trickier. You need to apply, okay? But application doesn't mean that much. It basically means that you provide a written statement to your landlord and that statement is in the form that the CDC has published, and they publish that in the Federal Register. So all the people who don't have money and will become homeless need to review the Federal Register to know what that is. It's a sworn statement, which means if you lie, you go to jail or get fined, and the landlord can make the choice about whether or not it meets all the requirements. You need to keep that statement in your file as well. There is no relief for payment of rent. This means that eventually, when and if you get evicted or not, you still have to pay this rent. So this is not forgiveness at all. So that cheery note, What do you think about the CDC order, Adam? Do you think it's going to make a difference?
Well, it will depend. In Arizona, it's the justice of the peace typically in justice court that looks at these things. I've been, during COVID, I've been down there to evict people and have been successful. So it's if the justice of the peace goes along with it, then you're good. So the real question is how restrictive or how much attention do they pay to these CDC guidelines if somebody doesn't bring it up, if somebody doesn't raise it. Like you said, a lot of people don't know about this, and so you can just go down there and proceed as usual. I think they're more in tune with Governor Ducey and the state restrictions and the moratorium than they are the CDC. But
the Arizona Supreme Court did provide guidance to judges about this and said that they do need to make sure that people followed the rule from the CDC before basically having a blanket. The CDC said this, which I think is the perception of most people.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Arizona Supreme Court has communicated that. I don't know. Looks like November and December are going to be a little bit rough on the court system, but at some point the evictions will obviously start. So Madrid is back into a lockdown. Looks like it's Europe's turn to have a big bubble, which means set your clock. We have 6 weeks or something. But Madrid's in a lockdown. Looks like Paris and some other places have likely new restrictions coming. And pretty dangerous. History being our guide on this, the major spike in the flu pandemic of 1918-19, whereas I've pointed out, ironically, during the first wave, one of the first early deaths was Donald Trump's grandfather. The real wave of death kind of came in November. And that was much, 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 much bigger than that happened in the spring. We had a third wave that was bigger than the initial one, but nothing like the disaster that occurred in November, March and April the following year, and then the disease kind of went away. Part of that obviously had to do with herd immunity. Also, the fact is that cases go down in the summer, not in Arizona where we're on top of each other, but in other parts of the country where the weather is good. You get some distance naturally. So with that being a guide, it's probably not a huge surprise that we're seeing an increase. There's also so much fatigue from it. Just people.
Yeah. Well, I just went and visited. My kids are in college, and I think everybody gets back and they're all socializing, and there's no social distancing. They're just forgetting about it, and they're all excited to be back with their friends, and it's really tough. So where we were in Utah, there was a spike with everybody coming back to school from all over the country, and they're trying to tighten it up a little bit because it spiked. So I think that's going to happen.
And the kissing.
There's that. Yep.
So let's do John's medical corner in the quickest way possible. Moderna's CEO said that it is likely that it will be late March or early April, if everything goes well, that the Moderna vaccine should be in the hands of regular Americans. And by hands, I mean arms, because they're going to give you a shot. AstraZeneca remains paused in the United States, but the view of the CEO of Moderna was that late Q1, early Q2 is a reasonable time frame. There are checks that are going on and applications that will need to happen. He believes that it will be late January or early February based on their time frame when they will ask the FDA for either full licensing of the drug or at least emergency use authorization. The earliest they could file for an emergency use authorization is November 25th. That's based on their time frame of their trial. And that would be for healthcare workers and elderly. And so that's where we stand on time frame from the optimistic perspective of executive at the pharmaceutical companies. the government has said it might be later in Q2 or Q3, meaning next summer. So looks like we're going to make it. We're going to have a vaccine, but it's not going to be before the election, even though we might announce a vaccine before the election. It won't be before that. So there you go. We survived. Danger, it comes in waves. Got a vice presidential debate coming up next week. It's got to be better, right?
It's got to be better. I would think so.
All right, so we'll see you next week. If you have any questions, feel free to email us, participate that way, and we'll see you next Thursday.